Welcome to this episode of the Uncharted Sounds Podcast. And for this series of episodes, we're focusing on the Uncharted 90s. That was formerly the Uncharted 80s podcast. We've rebranded to bring more flexibility in the types of bands that we can bring you. You can still get all of the Uncharted 80s episodes wherever you get your podcasts from, and there's some great stories in there. Today, I'm joined once again by my good mate, Noel. How you doing, Noel?
Very good, mate. Very good.
Excellent. Now, Noel, as you know, we started with Crashland, and we're now moving on to a band called Lush.
Drinking with my girlfriends on a Saturday night. The sky says come and meet my girlfriend. She's sitting in the corner looking rather uptight. So I say hello and I try to be nice, but I see he's feeling itchy, trying to play us off each other. Girls, girls, please don't fight. You get the picture. Hey, you, the muscles and the long hair telling me.
Now, you are the expert on this band. I know very little about them. So why don't you take us through a little bit about their background and their sort of history?
Never been called an expert before. I like it. But yes, so Lush were a girl-fronted indie band that formed in London in 1987. Now, initially there were 5 people in the band, moving to a four-piece in 1988. And that kind of lineup then was the one that had all the success, all the records that we'll be talking about pretty much. In fact, they had 3 consecutive singles that got into the top 30, the low sort of 21, 22 in the UK record chart. Their music evolved from a kind of a dreamy pop, similar to kind of the Cocteau Twins, to a more kind of melodic indie pop stuff, a bit like Sleeper and Echo Belly, that kind of vibe. But the thing about the band was that they were getting, going great guns and getting sort of stronger and stronger, but it came to a sort of grinding halt. Sadly and really tragically, the drummer Chris Ackland basically died, and it's pretty much signalled the end of the band. So quite a sad ending really to that story. Right, so the band was consisted of Miki Berenyi and Emma Anderson, and they both play guitar. These are the main lineup that carried on throughout the period we were talking about. And Chris Ackland, of course, you mentioned on drums. Now, initially they had on bass, they had Steve Rippon from the onset of the band, but he left in 1991 and he was replaced by Phil King, who then was obviously the bassist thereafter. And of course, there was a 5th member that I mentioned that left the band fairly early on, and that was Muriel Barham. And she actually left in 1988 to join the Pale Saints.
Okay, and of course we're going to be talking to Miki later on in the episode.
Excellent, yeah. Okay, so Miki and Emma had been long-term friends. They'd met at school in the early 1980s, and I think they were very close together. In the mid-80s, they actually published, you remember the fanzines you used to see around at different gigs all the time?
Yeah, loads of them, yeah.
Absolutely. But they had the one called Alphabet Soup, which was kind of specialised on gothic rock and had quite a few rude jokes in it, although they only ever did 5 editions of that. But obviously, gave them a bit of fun, and they got them out and about as well. I guess they were selling them at gigs, because they did attend a lot of gigs. I read a lot of the places around that kind of part of London where they were based, sort of Fulham, like the Greyhound and Hammersmith, the Clarendon, no longer around. So they had been playing individually in different bands actually, but they actually decided to form a band together in '87. Now, that band was initially called Baby Machines, and that's named after a line from a Susie and the Banshees song. They made their live debut at the Camden Falcon in March '88, but then Muriel, I mentioned, left the band and joined the Pale Saints. And at that point, Miki took over the main lead vocal. The name Lush, actually, they changed from the Baby Machines to Lush. I think it was agreed on Halloween of all days in 1988. So that was it. The band was in place. They got the name. They got the lineup now. And that was kind of going forward. This is the thing that sort of took off. So in January of '89, Melody Maker wrote a rave review of Lush, including them as being a monstrously wonderful. Great review that. Now that review, once it went out, the copy of Melody Maker went out, actually caused a lot of record companies to sort of pique up their interest in the band, and they started to make a lot of phone calls and take a lot of interest, and a lot of A&R men started turning up. So that's when the interest really kicked off. This interest from record companies led them to sign to 4AD Records. This was in summer of '89. And they released a critically appraised 6-track mini album called Scar. And it had the song Thought Forms on it. So Lush supported the EP with tours opening as a support act for Loop and a band, of course, we've spoken to on the Uncharted 80s podcast, the Darling Buds.
Yeah, I did see that. That was at Liverpool University, wasn't it? Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, excellent. Now, you remember when we talked to some of these 80s bands, like we talked to the Darling Buds, we talked to the Photos, they felt there was a bit of a laziness on the part of the press because they started to label them all. They labelled the new British Blondie, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
And they all seem to have these kind of lazy tags. They want to pigeonhole into a lazy. And at the time, the thing that was big, their latest pigeonhole lazy tag was shoegazing. So
what does that mean then? What's shoegazing?
It's a good question. In my head, I think shoegazing. I think it's like the Jesus and Mary chain, kind of dressed in black with a head bent forward over the guitar. Never really looking up, just sort of playing the guitar. But a lot of bands of that era, so they kind of pigeon them as shoegazing. And so at the start of 1990, you'd be pleased to hear this, they got a John Peel session.
So once again, I guess, we've seen this so many times with the bands that we've interviewed. I guess that must have had a big impact on their career.
Absolutely. I mean, the amount of bands we've spoken to that John Peel has sort of highlighted their stuff and helped their journey is incredible. So during that year, 1990, they released 2 EPs, the Mad Love EP and the Sweetness and Light EP. Now, later on, at a later point, both EPs were actually put onto a compilation album along with the Scar mini album we mentioned earlier, and that compilation was called Gala. Now, the Mad Love EP included a great track called Deluxe. So they did a bit of touring then. They toured extensively throughout 1990, including a tour in Japan, and they appeared at Glastonbury Festival in the summer. And this is an interesting little fact that I read about. That the famous photographer Annie Leibovitz saw their picture in a magazine and wanted to set them up as models for the look of the 90s in advertising campaigns for companies like The Gap. But the girl said, look, we're not interested. We just want to focus on the music. So the lead track of the other EP, Sweetness and Light, actually featured in John Peel's Festive 50 that year. Then in the spring of 1991, they toured the USA with Ride. So they've been playing the USA quite a bit, actually. In October, they released the Black Spring EP, and that had the lead track, Nothing Natural. Okay, so in '92, I noticed that they did. I mean, Lush have done loads of gigs over the years, but in '92 they played a gig in New Cross in London, and they were supported by Pulp, which is interesting because later, as we'll get to it, Jarvis Cocker was involved with Lush, so that's quite interesting. So the first full-length album of completely new material came out in February '92. It was called Spooky, and it was produced by the Cocteau Twins guitarist Robin Guthrie. So that kind of Cocteau Twins sound of a kind of wall of sound with soft, dreamy vocals, which they had, kind of reflected in the kind of production, I think, on the songs on that album. And it reached the top spot on the British indie chart, but also got to number 7 in the UK album chart as well.
Yeah, wow, right.
Yeah, it was preceded in January by the For Love EP, and its lead track featured on the album and featured number 35 in the UK singles chart. So I say For Love is a great song. At this point in time, when Steve Rippon, the bassist, left the band, and he was replaced by Phil King. Now, Phil King was a former picture researcher for NME, but he also played in the band Felt and some other bands as well. So he had a bit of a background as well. And during the summer of '92, Lush toured America again, and on the request, right, of the Jane's Addiction frontman Perry Farrell, they joined the lineup of the Loopalooza 30-day tour, playing all across America, and they played alongside bands like Pearl Jam, Ministry, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Soundgarden, Jesus Mary Chain. So now we move on to 1993 to 1994. This period here is kind of interesting because doing the research on this, right, you often hear the expression the difficult second album.
Oh yes.
From everything I've read, it was difficult. So the band themselves found the process very frustrating, and the initial producer actually pulled out. I think just because of probably sort of friction with the band feeling frustrated as well. So the whole thing wasn't a good basis to start from. But it was eventually recorded at Rockfield. Now, we know Rockfield, of course, don't we? Up near Monmouth, where Dave Edmunds had his studio there and everything. So, but it was recorded at Rockfield, and it was then mixed in Abbey Road and then in France by the producer Mike Hedges. Now, Mike had produced loads of bands. They include U2, The Undertones, the Manic Street Preachers, and The Cure. So loads of stuff that he's done. However, having finished that, neither the band nor 4AD, the record label, and its main executive, Ivo Watts Russell, were happy with the sound, and it was remixed before it was released. Just before the album came out, they actually released 2 EPs on the same day. But that said, having gone through the trouble with the album and the remix and so on, when it came out in June '94, it actually peaked at number 19 in the UK albums chart. So it actually was quite successful. The lead track is one of my personal ever Lush tracks. That's Hypocrite.
I can't explain
In August that year, they actually played at Reading Festival as well. They did have some management issues, actually. So their manager was called Howard Goff. He was one to push them to get a breakthrough in America, which obviously failed to happen. Yeah, so right. He was constantly turning the screw on them to get to America, which obviously was tiring and kind of exhausting and kind of, I guess, ultimately fruitless. Although I guess they have got a fan base in America, which is good, but probably not breaking. America is slightly different. And an EP was actually planned for the autumn of '94, but that got shelved, as did tours of the Japan and the UK. So it sounds like there were management issues going on, some sort of, I don't know, clash going on there. But they parted company with Goff. Apparently, the new management also prioritised success in America. So back to the same thing where they had to try and push on America again. So then moving on to 1996, then they released I'd describe as a pretty radio friendly single called "Single Girl," and that reached number 21 in the charts. Their final album, Love Life, that was released in March '96. Now, this was produced by Pete Bartlett, and he was the band's live engineer. And I think that's perhaps why it has a more punchier sound than the earlier albums. Perhaps more in style with the kind of Britpoppy stuff that was going on. I'm not labelling them. I'm just saying perhaps more in tune with that kind of punchy indie melodic pop that was going around at the time. It became the biggest selling album of their career, and it peaked at number 8 in the album charts. That's pretty impressive. And we mentioned earlier about Pulp supporting Lush back in the day, and they actually had a track on it with Jarvis Cocker doing a duet with Miki on a song called Ciao, which is a great song.
It is. It's probably one of my personal favourites.
Yes. Yeah, great song. It was actually preceded by a single called Lady Killers, which reached number 22 in the UK single chart. Great song. And then in July 96, they released a third single from the album called 500 in brackets Shake Baby Shake. And that also reached number 21 in the UK singles chart. This is where things take a very depressing turn, actually. So instead of capitalising on their success in the UK, the band's management, as we said, just kept sending them to America. They sent them on one ill-conceived tour where they were tired, they were exhausted, they were pressured. They were really not in a good place. And in October, the drummer, Chris, tragically took his own life in his parents' garden. The band were completely devastated by his death, and the rest of Lush went into a long period of mourning, effectively. They didn't officially break up until a year and a half later. They formally broke up in February 1998. So after the band came to a halt, Miki, she removed herself from public life, and then she went to work for an editorial assistant for the BBC and as a production editor at 2 major magazine publishers. So Emma formed a new band called Sing Sing and released 2 full-length albums before working on various jobs in the music industry. And Phil played bass at one point for the Jesus and Mary chain, and also worked for the Uncut magazine as a picture researcher. So, they all had sort of like creative jobs.
Did they ever get to a stage where they came back, of some form of reunion maybe?
I'm glad you asked that, my friend, because they did come back briefly. In 2015, Lush announced a reunion. So the lineup at that point was, again, Miki and Emma and Phil, but they were joined, which is quite nice actually. They were joined by an old friend of Chris's, who was Justin Welsh, who'd played for Elastica. So in April 2016, they released the Blind Spot EP. So it's the first recording they'd released for a very long time. Out of it came the lead track Out of Control, and that reached the top of the UK physical vinyl singles chart. They actually announced a show at the Roundhouse in May 2016, but it sold out in 6 hours. So they actually added a second date straight away after that.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And you know what? It's great for them, just to think that people still care and that people are really that keen to to sell it out in 6 hours. It's really, really good stuff. They then went on to play some more North American dates, and they did some European dates as well. And they did some festivals, including the Phoenix Festival, Tea in the Park, and Coachella over in the States, which obviously, if you remember when we talked to the Vapors on the 1980s podcast, they also played at Coachella. It was an incredible experience,
Yeah.
So to celebrate their return, 4AD released a limited red vinyl double album of their compilation. It's called Ciao, The Best of Lush. And they followed it by a CD box set called Chorus, which had pretty much everything they'd released on it. And they basically finished off by playing the final gig before they split. It was at Manchester Academy. On that occasion, Phil wasn't on bass. It was a guy called Michael Conroy of Modern English who stood in there. But that was it, really. That's the last that we've heard of Lush, apart from we're about to talk to Miki to find out the whole story.
Why don't we do that now, Noel? Thanks for that. It's a really good bio. Let's talk to Miki. Welcome, Miki, to the Uncharted 90s podcast. Great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Can you just start for us by giving us a bit about your background and your early influences?
Oh, blimey. So my background is that I was born in London, mostly brought up in London. My parents sort of split when I was very young. So I kind of lived in Windsor for a bit, and then I was back to London, and so I went to lots of different schools and stuff. And I guess I don't think that music was actually a big part of my early life. I mean, only in as much as it is for any child, you know what I mean? Musicals and Eurovision and all that bollocks, you know what I mean? I think the point at which I remember sort of getting quite into music, and I there's a bit of me that wonders if it was because I was always moving schools. It was quite a good way to get in with people. I kind of recognised I was at this school in Ladbroke Grove for a year, which was kind of, I mean, I suppose it was about 1979 or something. And London schools were all pretty rough back then, state schools. And I remember there were, like, everyone was really into madness and ska and all of that. I was quite good at art. So to avoid getting the shit kicked out of me, I used to draw the madness, M and the dancing beat girl.
Oh, yeah.
I used to decorate people's pencil cases and school bags with them. So that kind of kept me, on the safe side of the school playground. But then when I went to Queen's College, so it was kind of like from one extreme to another, sort of West London state school to a Central London private school, which is when I met Emma. And she was already kind of, I think she was, it was sort of smash hits era. So quite a lot of people, we had this little clique. I mean, I don't know, private schools, I'm no expert, but back then it was sort of, I mean, I guess it's like that now, it's not all bloody lords and ladies. There's a lot of people who would scrape the money together to send their girls there specifically to avoid getting the shit kicked out of you in a West London state school. So, you'd rock up there, but there was like a massive wealth spread, and some people were genuinely, really, really wealthy and quite snobby about it. So it's quite cliquey. And, there there was a bunch of us, me, Emma, a couple of others, who gravitated towards one another because we didn't really have that kind of money to back up our didn't have money for the skiing trips and the bloody, the horse gymkhanas and the God knows what else goes on, right? So we kind of bonded over music, and yeah, it was very smash hitsy. We were very kind of into anything and everything. So I think if I think back to those times, it's, Fun Boy 3 and I don't know, Orange Juice and Pig Bag. There's like a whole litany of, because we were living in London, we were about 14. And because you're in London, there were so many gigs. It was so easy and accessible, So if you bought the Enemy and the Melody Maker, and once you go to one gig, they're handing out flyers. So there's all sorts of things. So really it was through live music. So, the first gigs I went to were kind of Hammersmith Palais, Lyceum type big shows, Teardrop Explodes, Susie and the Banshees, Simple Minds, all of that. Brilliant. And then because you're in London and you get all these flyers, you start to work your way very quickly, in a few months, you're down at the Greyhound watching, I don't know, Lack of Knowledge or something, whoever the fuck they are, right? You know what I mean? So, and it just becomes a bit of a playground. And there was no ID carding back then. So, especially as a girl, if you were gothed up enough as I was, you passed the muster. So there was never any question of not getting into gigs. And yeah, so just from then on, it was as many gigs as possible every week. And that was our kind of, bonding platform, and how I got into music, how I got into fanzines, how I got into everything, really.
Because we read that you'd been to see you went to the Redskins. I wonder what that was like.
Yeah, we love the Redskins. We never saw them. Yeah, we never get to see them ourselves.
We love them, so. Yeah.
Oh, so the Redskins was sort of what I remember. I suppose it was around the miners' strike, and there were quite a lot of fundraisers. Yeah. And I remember them sort of being on the bill with Billy Bragg, Redskins. There's probably a couple of others. They'd often get, there was a sort of, they'd get a miner up to make a speech, and there'd be lots of kind of, collections and that. But again, it was kind of quite a community thing. And there might be someone like, I may be misquoting here, but it might have been someone like Seething Wells or Attila the Stockbroker or someone like that,
Yeah.
And I tell you what I do remember is I remember seeing them. I mean, they were absolutely amazing. Not just that, they came from around, well, I don't think they came from here, but they lived around Dollis Hill, Willesden Green, right? No fucker came from this area, right, when I was growing up. So that was a bit of a boast. But I do remember they played like a GLC festival. And the Redskins were playing, and oh my God, it absolutely kicked off. Like, all I remember is sort of standing in the crowd, and this sort of Zeke Heiling chant went up, and then this man emerged from the crowd. He just looked like, it was almost like something from a graphic novel. He just looked like this sort of Nazi killing machine, kind of, just went for them on the stage. Next minute, all hell broke loose. Bottles flying, complete riot everywhere. It was terrifying, but they were quite sort of violent times, I suppose. I don't know. Most gigs to me were always like quite a safe haven, but it could kick off at any time, I suppose.
I think you're right. I've certainly been to gigs like that. We both have over the past. But I guess being a skinhead band or being associated with skinheads itself brings that element, who might not be on the same page with the socialist kind of view that they had, maybe. But
yeah, I think that was the point. I think the kind of right-wing skinheads didn't like them being left-wing skinheads.
Exactly.
Battling over an identity, I suppose. So we still had identity wars back then. That's nice to know.
But there was definitely a more aggressive time, I would say, going to concerts back in those days.
I mean, I remember I went to the Jam at the Rainbow one time, and I was in the gents' toilet, sort of standing there as one does, and this window gets smashed in front of me, and his skinhead's outside, and he starts spitting at me, and I'm literally ducking because I can't go anywhere but just duck. It's like, go, leave me alone.
The skinhead thing was quite a thing. I do remember getting chased by skinheads, and yeah, it was. I suppose that was their kind of image, wasn't it? I don't remember goths being violent.
No,
There were
no.
other factions that were non-violent, right? But I think the skinheads and I suppose some psychobilly gigs that could be quite
Yeah,
good, couldn't
yeah,
it?
yeah.
Meeting fans and all that, yeah.
Interesting stuff. So I was going to ask you about your fanzine that you did with Emma, Alphabet Soup. I know you didn't do many issues, but did you interview any bands during that period?
Yeah, we did, and we were absolutely fucking awful at it. I think we only did it because we thought you're supposed to do it. If you've got a fanzine, you've got to interview bands. The first interview we did was with this band called Geschlechtakt, who were, I guess, sort of quite like, you wouldn't have called it goth back then. You'd have called it positive punk, just to demarcate the zones. I think we did like them, but I think we interviewed them because they seemed less terrifying than a band that was kind of a bit more well established. Oh, and they had a guitarist called Seven, like the number seven. He was very sweet, right? So maybe he was just very friendly, and we thought, oh, why don't we interview them? Because he seems quite not frightening. And then what I remember is we went to interview, they were supporting Furio, I think. Was it Furio or UK Decay? It was one of the two at the Marquee. And Emma had this enormous ghetto blast. That's all we could find, right? We actually had this tape machine, which she had in a plastic bag throughout. She was too embarrassed to take out the plastic bag. So we did this fucking interview, right? We had to do it after the gig because we couldn't find the right time to do it, by which time we were completely pissed. And she forgot to put the fucking record button on. So I had to write it all from memory. And I couldn't remember anyone's name. So the whole interview was things like, oh, they had a saxophone player. Let's call him John. Like, it was terrible. It was absolutely terrible, but it was comic because it was terrible. And all our interviews were probably just as bad. I remember interviewing Exmal Deutschland in their hotel dressing room, and actually it would have been a young boy's dream because they were all running around and getting changed, and me and Emma were sitting there mutely on the corner of a bed going, what are your influences? It's all a bit sad.
Brilliant. Tell us about signing to 4AD, because Ivo Watts Russell sounds like a really interesting character.
I mean, I think I was a bit, maybe I was a little bit terrified of him. I was certainly very shy of him when he kind of first encountered us. At that time, we were just playing little pub gigs. And to be honest, Emma was very much the manager of the band at that point, because we'd all started this band when we were at college. So Emma and me had been friends at school, but Chris Merrill, the original singer, and Steve Rippon, the original bass player, were just on my course. I mean, I literally went up to them and said, do you want to join a band? And they were like, oh yeah, all right. And I said, great, you're in. And that was it. So, but Emma had taken a year out, and she had been working with Jeff Barrett, who, is involved with Heavenly, but at the time he was kind of, I think, possibly working out of the Creation offices, and he was doing press for Creation and Factory, and he was putting on gigs at the Falcon. So Emma was the one who was kind of networked into, as small as the music business was then, or that side of it, she was much more au fait with that. So she was the one who sent the tapes to Ivo and Rough Trade and blah, 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 and kind of, chatted with them. So when we first signed to 4AD, it was very much sort of Emma doing all the talking and the rest of us kind of like sitting mutely in the background, not wanting to sort of say the wrong thing, so didn't say much. But, he's a very nice guy and a true lover of music. I think that was very good for us, that it was never about the image of the band or, mining that in any way or using it. And there were a lot of bands with women in them on 4AD who were equally not expected to play on that part of it, Cocteau Twins, Throwing Muses, Dead Can Dance. I mean, no one had to do, I don't know, videos kind of half dressed or album sleeves with them all photoshopped or whatever the fucking equivalent was back in then days. But you know what I mean? So you could just be a band on 4AD. And I think that was the most important thing to us. And, you know, they would guide you, but they would never bludgeon you. It was never that kind of, you know, this has to be the single. This is the way you have to do it. There was a lot of discussion, but, you know, we kind of knew fuck all. So we were very happy to sort of be led by, you know, by them. And you know, which included kind of having Tim Freeze Green produce a record. That was very much Ivo's idea. But, you know, we didn't have a fucking clue, really. We were a little, you know, pub band. So it was really good to have that kind of encouragement and protection, actually.
That's
You
cool.
know, it shielded us. So
Yeah, it's interesting because the when we interviewed the Darling Birds and also the photos, they got a whole thing about they're expected to be a certain way from their labels and so on. And the press labeled them as British Blondie. Neither of them like that whatsoever. And I had a question for you, which is, how do you feel about being labelled initially as shoegazers, but then as Britpop? Did you like being labelled at all in the first place? I can't imagine it was great, but
no band likes being labelled.
no,
None of them,
no.
right? You know, My Bloody Valentine don't want to do any fucking interviews about being shoegaze. They don't want to talk about when they were a garage band. I get it, you know.
Yeah.
They didn't pick any of those bloody labels and they're not interested in them. I think that Pulp and you know, Blur and most of those people refuse to be labeled Britpop, you know. I mean, unless it's, you know, listen, I don't give a shit anymore if someone calls it shoegaze, because these days it's actually a pathway to something. You know, there's a whole fucking world out there of people who go, oh, shoegaze, great, you know, without a clue of what it actually meant or, you know, what it started as. But nobody likes to be labeled. You know, not least because you look at the other bands in your little group and you go, well, I'm not fucking like them. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Don't pigeonhole me with that lot. Leave me separate, please.
Yeah. And I get it. You know, I mean, I was talking to someone the other day about this. I said, you know, it's like what the algorithm is now. I get it, right? There's a shorthand. If you're a journalist or you're a publication, you go, hey, if you like this band, you might like these bands, and you lump them all together, and then you make it a scene because you want to sell copies and you want everyone to, you know, you want to invent a scene because that's the thing that brings people to you. Then you want to destroy it and replace it with another one, so you keep getting that churn of people buying your paper. I get it. But it's nothing to do with the bands. So I personally always feel, why don't you ask the journalists about all these labels? Because they know far more about it than we do.
So because there were quite a number of female fronted bands around that time. I don't know, was there much, I don't know what the word is, camaraderie between you, or were you all just like, no, you crack on over there and we'll crack on over here? Was there any interaction?
I mean, I'll be honest, when we first got into playing gigs, it just didn't seem that important. You know, there were blokes who were blokey and they were dickheads, and there were girls who were bitchy and who didn't like any other girls being around. And then mostly people in the other direction, it didn't really give a shit. You know, I mean, I make it sound like some sort of weird utopia, but on the whole, it was a bit, because it was quite politicized. You know, people didn't really, it was uncool to sit there. You know, if you were a bloke and went like, oh, they've got a fucking bird in them, there'd be 8 blokes around you going, what's your fucking problem? Similarly, if you mentioned anything about race, you know what I mean? So it was a very political environment. It was rock against racism. It was, you know, lots of kind of feminist bands that had come out of the kind of mid-80s and were, you know, quite openly, you know, feminist. It wasn't a fucking dirty word. Do you know what I mean? Greenham Common, blah, 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 this, that, and the other. Lesbian rights, you know, squats in South London with whatever. Do you know what I mean? So when I think of the Britpop era, my thing is that it was completely unpolitical. It was money. It was major labels. It was PRs. It was a business. So then actually there was less camaraderie. And then people were quite, so no, there wasn't much bloody sisterhood. I can fucking tell you that in the Britpop years. But even in the early years, it wasn't really like there was a bunch of women that got together and thought we've got to fight all these men. It was just like, well, some blokes are dickheads and others aren't. I mean, it just didn't really cross our minds to think about it in that way.
So from a songwriting perspective, then, how did you get from being in that sort of pub, environment to getting to a stage where you were, writing your first single and your first album? How did that songwriting come about, and what has it changed at all in the intervening years?
I think the early Lush gigs, everything was always, I mean, everything I do is always slightly the wrong way around, and it's never properly planned. So when we formed Lush, it was just about wanting to kind of jump in there and get involved. So it was almost like, we want to play some gigs, so we need to write some songs, right? It wasn't like I'd been honing this craft in a bedroom and then thought, oh, now's the time to work up the courage and play live, right? It was like, oh, we want to get out there. Oh yeah, we'll need some songs. Fuck it. Yeah, okay, quick. And so the first songs were pretty fucking awful, but hey, they were just punky little ditties or whatever. We were having fun. And then I think when Emma was more involved with working with other bands and stuff, I think she kind of upped her game, and I seem to remember like a song like Thought Forms, or maybe Sunbathing even, where you sort of thought, oh fuck, actually that's quite good. I thought, oh, fuck, I better get my act together. So I think it was just not being so impatient, not kind of banging out the first thing that comes into your head, but actually sort of sticking with it. And then, once we signed to 4AD, they gave us like little Porter studios, which was like a fucking godsend. The idea you could just record something and put like a drum machine track on it. Suddenly there was a bit of space to actually think rather than having to write every song just on your own. Like, I think I wrote a lot of songs with a live set in mind, so that if Emma wrote kind of, lilting, kind of slightly folky 3-4 signature songs, I think, well, I better write a fucking Baby Talk or something to like liven it up a bit. And I feel like I sort of wrapped around her a bit, and was, inspired by that, actually, that to just make it a coherent whole of a band rather than two types of songs fighting each other. It felt like, okay, well, this will work live. This will be a good set ender, and so, and I think I still do that a bit, even we've got a new album out now, or it will be out in April, but we had the first track out a couple of days ago. And again, we've got 3 songwriters in the band.
And you were primarily writing separately, I think, as opposed to like collaborating, yeah? No.
I mean, with Lush, first of all, I'm not a good enough musician to jam, right? That's the root of it, right? It's not like, oh no, we've got this brilliant other way of writing songs. If someone says, oh, it's in A, I'll go, right, so I just play A then, do I? Right? So certainly in terms of working out chords and how the song changes and what have you, I have to sit there and just actually work it out. With Lush, I think Emma always had like a real vision of how she wanted her songs to sound. So she didn't really want you treading all over her song. The only time I think she collaborated is once she was in a studio with a producer, and then she would work with them, but she didn't, want the rest of us involved. Personally, I always felt I could have done with a bit of help, because by the time you've written the song and you have to write the fucking both guitar parts and the bass line and work out how the drums are going to go and any keyboard parts and any fucking other embellishments, I'm kind of like run dry at that point. And when we were in Piroshka, having Mick Conroy write the bass lines was like amazing, right? It was so lovely because he's such a musical person that it absolutely swung the song in a different direction. That it's quite funny, like we covered some sort of Lush songs because we didn't have enough of a set early on. And even Moose just playing, rethinking Emma's guitar parts, you know, the parts that I wrote actually on my songs. I love it. So I've discovered that actually, yes, I write the beginning of the song on my own or the structure of it, but having other people coming in and playing their parts and writing their parts, that is a whole new thing for me. And I do really, really love it.
And that's the Miki Berenyi Trio.
That's right.
Yeah.
Not my choice to have my name in there.
No.
Let me just say.
That's got to give you some profile,
well, it's going to have to. Well, I think that was the thinking, because with Piroshka, people were like, "Oh, I didn't know that was you," and it's fucking hell, you have to spell everything out these days. So yeah, it's that.
When you play with the trio, are you doing Lush songs?
Yes, there's a few in there. So the weird thing is that the I mean, it's probably in the fucking press release, but the point is that when I was doing the book, you get asked to do these things, and it's at festivals, it's at all sorts. So you get asked to do these things, but of course, because you're a musician, they're like, "Can you play some songs?" And I'm like, "I don't do the solo acoustic thing. I just don't." And everyone would thank me for that if they saw it happen. And so basically, it was like, well, Ollie and Moose were happy to do it with me. So I think the first book thing I did was at Rough Trade, and we played like 4 Lush songs, I think, you know, and then we got offered, that was it. We got offered that Wedding Present tour, and then we got offered the Gang of 4 tour. And then we thought, I'm not fucking going out as a Lush covers band. Like, that's ridiculous. But I thought, I really fucking want to go on tour with these bands. So we were like, shit, right. Well, like with Lush, shit, we better write some songs because we want to go on tour. So we quickly started writing songs. So the more songs we wrote, the more we could push the Lush songs out of the set. And we're still there, really. So we've got the album. There's maybe about 3 or 4 Lush songs. Actually, there's 1 or 2 Piroshka ones as well. It's quite good to have that kind of back catalogue, because you could just pull something out and play it for a bit and then go, right, sick of that, do another one. But they are all kind of reinvented. So I do quite like that. They do feel quite fresh, you know.
How did you get Jarvis Cocker to sing on Ciao? Because that's a great, great song.
Since I walked away, I never thought that I could feel as great as I do today. 'Cause you were nothing but a big mistake, and life is wonderful now that I'm rid of you.
Oh, I must have been crazy to have stayed with you. I can't believe I thought I was in love with you, but now the scales have fallen, I can really see. And I say, go to hell, 'cause that's where you took me.
Well, I felt better since I slammed that door. You always crammed my style, I never noticed before. It's been a non-stop party since I blew the coop. I can't believe I fell for such a...
So that song was originally written, I tell you what, Chris, I think, did he want to sing a song, or was he, I just seem to remember that he was like maybe wanting to, I'm pretty sure he said, oh, I'd like to sing a song. And I was like, oh, all right, fuck. So I wrote a duet, and then he fucking bottled it. He was like, so I didn't say I was going to sing it. So basically, I was going out with John Best at the time, who was a PR. They had a company called Savage and Best. And I'd been to see Pulp a load of times, but Savage and Best were doing Pulp. I think John suggested it. And I remember I remember doing a demo of the song and singing both parts. So I was like, I've been so singing like down in my boots. And John said like Jarvis was absolutely pissing himself laughing. But yeah, he was very happy to do it. He was incredibly sweet about it. I think we got him at the right time because it was right before the whole Glastonbury explosion. So he came in and did it, and it was really good fun. But I think by the time the album was going to come out, I do remember like a couple of the other members of the band sort of getting a bit, you know, I don't know, sort of tackling me at some gig going, you can't release that as a single. And I was like, call your fucking boots, like they were suddenly like regretting that they'd let their fucking star fucking sing on our shitty record. So, but Jarvis was always very charming about it, actually. Like, it was probably Ivo's most hated song. I do remember sort of him just slightly head in hands going, I cannot believe this song is coming out on my label. But fair play to him. He let it come out.
Well, we love it. We really love that song. And we also love the song Heavenly Nobodies. We did look at the lyrics, and I just wondered what that song was about. Was it literally about meeting your heroes and being disappointed, or was it something else? Had you met somebody? Had you met your hero, and then you wrote a song about it? What was the background?
Do you know what? I was thinking about that song the other day because I got on social media this endless thing of like, some artist or whoever the fuck, right, that you like what they do, and then you find out that they're a bit of a dick, right? And everyone goes absolutely potty. And it was kind of that. There was a similar narrative back then, about people, and they go, oh, like deifying people who produce the stuff that you like. Enjoy the stuff, right? That is absolutely what all us people who love music, that's what it's all about. But you're on dangerous territory when you're kind of claiming that the people who make it are these absolute wonderful people who never do anything wrong. And to me, it's like, listen, take the stuff that's useful to you, the stuff that moves you, the stuff that excites you. Leave all the rest. You don't need to know. Okay? It's not important, how nice a fucking person they are. They never are that nice. I'm telling you now, right? Whatever fucking person that you follow on Instagram or whatever who you think is so fucking lovely, you don't know them, right? Everyone can be a wanker when they want to be. You don't need to know. Right?
So I do need to ask you this. It's obviously about Chrissy's death was absolutely shocking. Even to today, it's still shocking. Where were you when you heard about that?
I was at home. I was at home in my flat in Kensal Rise, and Phil actually rang me. So I'd spoken to Chris that week. He'd gone up to the lakes. I spoke to his mum, I think, that day, and then Phil phoned me. And I think, because we were kind of worried about him, we were checking in, and yeah, he said he'd just spoken to the family, and they told him what had happened, and it was, oh my God. Oh my God. I mean, I could still, it's like those where were you when 9/11 happened or whatever. You get this like vivid snapshot of the room. The feeling I remember is just wanting to kind of unhear it, which sounds a bit ridiculous. I remember thinking, all I want to do is run from this room and up the road in a kind of, if I run fast enough, maybe it will unhappen. I don't know. It's not even thinking straight, but that's the sort of feeling I remember. And then, having to call people, tell people. We had a lot of people coming over to the flat, and we kind of had almost like a 3-day wake of people turning up and talking, and everyone was in shock. It was just fucking awful. It was just absolutely the worst thing that had ever happened to me in my life. I can't. Oh my God. Like, I get upset about it, even thinking about it, but and not least because I just think it's something that should never have happened, right? And I don't just mean that in a kind of like, oh, it should never have happened. I mean it in a sort of, that moment shouldn't have happened. He should have got through this. He would have been fine. I fucking promise you, he would have been fine. And a lot of people, I do get people saying like, oh, do you think it would have been easier or better now because people are much more aware of mental health issues and there's more help out there and blah, blah, blah. And I'm not convinced, if I'm honest, because it wasn't a long-term problem. He wasn't feeling great for a few months. I can sit here and fucking speculate a million reasons because we have done over the years, but no one has ever come up with a convincing, oh, that was it. And, I don't think he would have sought out help because it's not like he had been depressed for, 4 years or he'd had these thoughts, or do you know what I mean? It just came out of the blue. And to be honest, I'm not particularly convinced that, as far as I know, I think the suicide rate amongst, young men has actually gone up in the interim period. So I'm not sure that, as wonderful as it is that help is out there, I'm not convinced that it's actually had any sort of substantial effect on something as extreme as that when someone decides to take their own life. So yeah, fucking awful, absolutely awful.
Okay, sorry to have had to ask about it, but we don't want to upset you.
No, it's fine. I'm happy to talk about it. I probably get more. I do get upset, but I get angry as well. But
yeah, because it obviously had such a devastating impact on you and the band as well.
I mean, to be honest, the band was kind of in trouble already. I think me and Emma had already, we always had quite a difficult relationship, but I think it was, on its sort of last legs by then. And, Emma had already said that she wanted to leave the band, before that happened. We had a kind of band meeting and I mean, my memory is that, we glossed it, we kind of sort of got through a lot of things and talked about a few things, and we were like, look, let's just make another record, come on, like it's definitely worth doing. I think one of Emma's things was she said, I just don't want to make another Love Life. I don't want to make another pop record. I don't give a fucking shit about the charts. I've had enough of all of that. Absolutely right. I was like, fine, I'll fucking write an album of Gregorian chants if you want. And that was literally my line. And let's just do it. It just seems a real shame to chuck all this away at this point. So that's where we kind of left it. But then, a couple of weeks later, if that, when Chris died, that was certainly it for me. I mean, I think it was for everyone. It was just like, okay, there's just no way to carry on with it. So, yeah, had to kind of find something else to do. I think trying to carry on at that point would have just been, actually, it would have just been impossible. There would have been no point. I even stopped going to gigs. I just remember going to see bands and thinking, I just don't want to be here because the one person I want to see isn't here. And so everything sort of pales in comparison. So I literally had to go out and find something else to do that was like a fresh start, which was working at TV listings at IPC. So that was quite a turnaround.
How did you get to that from there then to the reunion? How did that all come about?
Well, I think because Emma and Phil, so Phil was in the Mary chain, so he carried on touring. And obviously he'd always worked at music papers, so he was still at, NME or Uncut or wherever the fuck he was. Emma, again, had always I guess she'd always got kind of music industry jobs. So I think she was working, I don't know, she had all sorts of jobs in the music biz. I think working for an agent, working for a management company. So, both of them kind of kept their hand in. Emma had a band after that, she'd been in Sing Sing. And I think they were both online. That was the other thing. I had no social media whatsoever. And I think both of them spotted that the kind of shoegaze thing had become, a thing, that there were young bands doing it, that people had very fond memories. I mean, God, I had no fucking idea, right? So occasionally over the sort of 20-year period, it would come up of, oh, we could do this reunion, or we could do I think there was an All Tomorrow's Parties that was mooted. These things would kind of come and go. Oh, the Mary chain said that we could support them. I don't know, these bits and pieces would come up, and I'll be honest, I was always a bit reluctant, not least because by then I had small children and a fucking full-time job, But by the time the actual reunion, which was 2015, came up, my kids were a little bit older, and it just seemed a bit more concrete, like the proposal that sort of Emma had found some guy to manage us, and I don't know, it just seemed a little bit more concrete. Also, actually, I do remember, bands like Slow Dive were out there. I'm pretty sure Ride were playing as well by then. So you kind of, the Valentines had played, blah, blah, blah. There was plenty of these bands doing that. And you thought, okay, I can kind of see how that might work. And the infrastructure was there, the agent was already interested. And also I'd been working 5 years at that job, so I got a sabbatical. So I thought, okay, that'll fit. I can take the sabbatical plus my holidays and use that. So whatever, on a practical level, it worked. So, I mean, I'm not going to lie, Moose was absolutely dead against it. Do not do this. Right? It's going to be a terrible mistake. But, I don't know. I just thought, yeah, there was something about it that I thought, okay, fuck it, actually. Last chance, it felt like. I thought either I do this now or I never do music again, because I haven't done it in the 20 years in between. And I'm not a good person at doing things off my own bat. Like, I'm really not, I would never have started Lush without Emma. I would never have written a book if someone hadn't fucking approached me. And I don't think I would have done music again if that Lush reunion hadn't happened, So yeah, I'm actually very grateful to it, despite the fact that it all ended a bit in tears. But, it was, fuck it, it was great fun to do it. The gigs were great. And I was back in the saddle, yeah.
I was going to ask actually about the end. What about the ending of it all? What happened?
Oh God, just the same old shit that fucking happens every time with bands. You know what I mean? It's difficult. I have to tread carefully because every time I open my mouth about this, some absolute rocket goes off and I get a load of bollocks about it. But at the end of the day, that's bands. Ask fucking any band, right? And the explosions that can happen and the way that people can drive you absolutely fucking nuts and the way you take it out on each other. And look, it's just the way it fucking works, right? And it's not nice. I'm not for a minute saying it is. But, the nearest I can compare it to is if you've got family Christmases where you can just about last 2 days, right, before everyone starts to really piss each other off. And at some point, someone's going to say something that is going to make you, as a fucking 50-something-year-old person, regress into your teenage self and utterly fucking lose it, right? So, it's a matter of knowing people too well. And also personalities. You meet these people when you're young, and you don't know any better, and you get thrown together. And sometimes it's very, very difficult to make those relationships kind of develop into something that isn't going to be difficult, boundaries, etc. Probably every band needs like a tour psychiatrist. therapist type person.
Yeah, we've heard it many a time on our different interviews, haven't we, Martin?
Yeah, we have. Yeah.
So,
And are you still in touch with Emma and Phil?
No, they don't speak to me.
Okay.
Yes, I think the book was the final nail in the coffin. So, whatever.
So that's called Fingers Crossed, How Music Saved Me from Success. And just for our listeners, that was the book of the year in Rolling Stone, Mojo, and Sunday Times. But it's a really intriguing title. So can you tell us about it?
I mean, I will say that I tried, there's a process to, I know nothing about the publishing world. Well, I know a bit now, but I certainly didn't when I wrote that book. And, you think like, okay, great, fucking finished. And then they go, oh, no, we need a title now. And you go, oh, fuck. Okay. So it's like, I don't know if you've ever been in that position where you're trying to find a band name or something. Do you know what I mean? The number of ridiculously shit names that you come up with. And there were many lists, right? So Fingers Crossed was one of the last, I think, when it was like, oh, well, why not just that? And then you get everyone going, actually, that's pretty good. Now we need a subtitle. And I'm like, oh, for fuck's sake. Right. And various, but make sure it mentions maybe Lush or shoegaze or music or something. And it's like, honestly, I probably still have a list somewhere that all awful. And the How Music Saved Me from Success was literally the very last thing in a kind of, oh, I don't know, fucking call it this then, in a like, that was my kind of like, this is, you're not going to use this, but this is me telling you to fuck off and use one of the others. And then it was like, that's the one.
That's incredible.
But I think the feeling for me was like, I mean, if you're going to analyze it, was that there is, I did get asked this the other day where they were talking about the Britpop years and they were saying, if you were, say, a few years older or younger, if you were a few years younger and you'd got into music at the time that Britpop was happening, if that was the time you got into music, how would you have navigated that as being in a band and it being your first taste of being in a band? And I said, I wouldn't have been in a band. I would have done something else. There's no way I would have got involved in that if that was my first taste of it. So there's a bit of me that thinks I fell into music. I didn't there's many other things I feel I could have done. I'm not saying I would have done them particularly well, but, I've been an editor. I was fairly academic at school. I could have become a teacher. I don't fucking know. Do you know what I mean? There's whatever. I could have had a different career. So the fact that I got into music, there's a bit of me that thinks, well, I might have done better, right? Certainly financially, if I'd have gone and done something else. But equally, the one thing that carried me through the sort of bumps and knocks was that I actually really liked the music that we made. I really liked making music and playing music. And, that's the sort of boring answer, that the essence of it is actually the only thing that is fucking worth anything, really, So fuck all the success or the non-success or not doing well enough or selling out or whatever the fuck it is. At the end of the day, there's just those albums and those songs, and that's the only thing that matters.
Can you just share one last thing with us, which is if we asked you what your greatest memory was of your time, what would you say?
Oh my God.
I know it's a great question, isn't it?
It's not. It's a terrible question. I have no idea. Honestly, my bar is quite low for great memories. Any great, it's never going to be, oh yeah, headlining, whatever the fuck. It's not going to be that. I was probably too nervous when something like that was happening. It will literally be Chris making some asinine joke in the back of the van on the way to fucking Newcastle or something. It's going to be ridiculous. So no, I don't have a best memory.
Okay. How about when the band played Lollapalooza? Well, that's a massive festival. I just wondered how that came about.
I'm struggling to remember. Like the thing is what I remember is we had this manager, Howard, right? Howard Goff, who actually used to work at 48D. He became our manager. And, all the stuff I'm saying about 4AD, about how they were very happy to, protect us from the world. They had this sort of ethos of aesthetics and not, pushing you in any garish commercial way. Well, Howard was the antithesis of that, right? He was the plugger. I mean, to be fair, I think I've always credited with him with kind of making quite a lot of the success for the Pixies, because he was the one who was willing to shove them, market them in that way, you know, as a fucking band that had opinions and a whatever. Anyway, Howard was the one who was always looking outward to like things like Lollapalooza, or, you know, fucking making a video with whoever the fuck or whatever, you know. That commercial side of it was very much Howard, and he was, you know, he was the one who really wanted us to tour in America again and again and again, and, you know, Lollapalooza was part of that. And I think, of course, you know, we had an agent, so Mark Geiger, who was our agent and it was involved with Lollapalooza. Of course, all these people and Warner Brothers, they all were instrumental in, you know, pushing us, you know, onto that tour. But, you know, those people had a lot of bands that could have gone on that tour, and Howard was the one who was really, you know, out there working it for us. I mean, and when I say working it, I literally mean like fucking hanging around Perry Farrell and like, and greasing the wheels and charming the fucking schmoozing and sharing out the coke and doing whatever it was required, right? And, you know, yes, of course, Perry Farrell liked the band, the whole music to soothe the savage beast, whatever the fuck it is, right? And they had no fucking women. None of the bands had women in them. They had a lot of women working on Lollapalooza. I mean, I had a fucking great time and it was really good fun. But we were the only bands with women in them on the main stage. So they kind of needed a female presence, you know. I mean, I've since heard that, I don't know, I think Chili Peppers bloke, what's the fucking name? Oh, Anthony, kind of wanted L7. I mean, God knows, I'm sure everyone had their own suggestions, but hey, we fucking got it. And it was very out of the blue for me. So I do remember being told that we've got it, and not really knowing anything about a lot of the other bands and going, right, okay. So I kind of got sent a load of records pre-Spotify. So I actually had to get the vinyl, thinking, what the fuck are we doing on this tour? And I was just clinging to the hope because the Mary Chain were on there. And I thought, well, we'll just hide in their dressing room, right? I'm just going to glom onto them and use them as a shield against this sort of machismo testosterone mayhem. But it was actually great fun. I had a really good laugh. Completely lost my mind.
When the tour got to Dallas, I believe you decided to do an impromptu stage dive.
Yeah, that was very ill-conceived and ill-judged. I think the thing about stage diving, right, and probably most people know this, is you need to work your way up from small gigs before you launch yourself from a 15-foot high stage in a Dallas amphitheater, right? And I hadn't done the groundwork, so I kind of went flying off the stage and then reappeared on top of the crowd who were holding me up with just blood everywhere, and then had to be kind of rushed to hospital with
God
in my head. So yeah.
Wow.
All right. Well, look, thank you so much for your time. You've been absolutely brilliant. Really, really great stuff.
Sorry about all the swearing.
That's fantastic. It's really great to speak to you. Thank you so much. Cheers, Miki.
No, it was lovely of you to have me on. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
See you.
See you again.
All right. Cheers. Bye.
Strong, I've tried to be tough, but I think that this time I've had more than enough. I've seen too much of your games and your immature stuff. You're a waste of time. All the people I've known throughout all the years, too many vodkas and too many beers, and I've learned a few lessons from all of the tears. You're way out of line. So lucky sometimes. I sit down and I look at all my friends. They mean more than the stupid fools that pass my way.
Well, thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. Now, as you know, we do our research from a variety of sources, but if you want to add any more detail for us, or even correct us on anything, then please do get in touch with us. Where can they get in touch with us, Noel?
They can contact us on our email address, which is unchartedsoundspodcast@gmail.com.
And of course, you can also get in touch with us on our Facebook group, the Uncharted Sounds group, as well as our Facebook page, the Uncharted Sounds page. Thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you.